Once we initiate the divorce and the mental incompetency clause is triggered, that gullible, desperate man won't know what hit him. The company will be ours. Daniel Brooke stood frozen in the hallway of his own mansion, his back pressed against the cool wall, listening to his wife's voice drift down from the master bedroom. The voice he'd woken up to for 2 years, the voice that had whispered, "I love you," just that morning. Gullible. Desperate. The words carved into him like a blade finding bone. 2 male voices laughed in agreement. One he didn't recognize. The other belonged to David Crane, his chief operating officer, his right hand, the man he'd trusted to run his billion-dollar logistics empire. Daniel's hands trembled. The marble floor beneath his feet seemed to tilt. Outside, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Lake Michigan stretched out gray and indifferent under October clouds. Inside, his world was collapsing with surgical precision. But this moment, this devastating moment, wasn't where the story began. It began 3 years earlier with a promise Daniel had never intended to keep. Daniel Brooke grew up in the kind of poverty that teaches you to count pennies before you can count to 10. His father died when Daniel was 9, a construction accident that left behind a widow, a son, and medical bills that swallowed everything. His mother, Elena, worked 3 jobs to keep their small apartment in Columbus, Ohio. Daniel remembered falling asleep to the sound of her sewing machine in the next room, the rhythmic hum that meant they'd have groceries that week. He was 12 when he started fixing broken electronics pulled from dumpsters behind pawn shops. He'd watch YouTube tutorials on the public library computers, teaching himself circuit boards and soldering. Then he'd sell the repaired items at weekend flea markets for triple what the parts cost him. Every dollar went into a shoebox under his bed. His mother found it once, tried to give it back for normal kid things. He refused. "This is for college." "And then I'm buying you a house," she cried. He remembered the way her calloused hands cupped his face. "You're going to do something extraordinary, baby." He believed her because she was the only person who'd ever believed in him. By 16, Daniel was running a computer repair side business from their apartment building's basement. By 20, he'd dropped out of Ohio State on a full scholarship to chase a software idea that consumed every waking thought. A logistics optimization platform for small shipping companies. Boring to most people. Beautiful to him. His mother was terrified, but she'd learned not to doubt her son. He sold the first version for $20,000. Used that to build version 2. Sold that for $200,000. Then $2 million. Then a Chicago venture capital firm called him a prodigy and handed him $8 million in Series A funding. He bought his mother that house. A small place with a garden and a porch swing in a decent Columbus suburb. She lived in it for 6 months before the cancer returned, the same one that had killed his father, lurking in the genetic code they'd both passed down. She died on a Sunday morning, Daniel holding her hand, her last words barely a whisper. "Don't forget to live, baby. Don't just build. Live." He was 26. He had $7 million. He had nobody. So he built. He built because grief is easier when you're drowning in work. He built because spreadsheets don't leave you. Within 8 years, his platform became the backbone for mid-tier logistics across the Midwest and East Coast. He went public at 33. The valuation hit $2 billion overnight. Forbes called him a genius. Daniel called himself exhausted. He worked 16-hour days, slept in his Chicago office more than his penthouse, forgot what his own kitchen looked like. His assistant ordered all his meals. He owned 3 suits and rotated them weekly because fashion was time he didn't have. His dating life was a graveyard of first dates where women either wanted his bank account or couldn't handle his schedule. He was lonely in a way money couldn't solve, which made the loneliness worse because money was supposed to solve everything, wasn't it? That's when Nathan Cole walked back into his life. They'd been roommates freshman year at Ohio State before Daniel dropped out. Nathan was pre-law, steady, and loyal in a way that felt foreign to Daniel's chaos. They'd bonded over cheap Chinese takeout and study sessions that turned into life philosophy debates at 3 in the morning. When Daniel left school to chase his startup dream, Nathan stayed, finished his degree, went to law school, built a quiet, respectable career as a corporate attorney in Cincinnati. They'd stayed in touch through occasional texts and holiday calls, the way old friends do when life pulls them in different directions. Then Nathan got engaged. His fiancée, Sarah, was a pediatric nurse with a laugh that could light up a room and the kind of warmth that made strangers feel like family. Nathan called Daniel personally. "I need you there, man, as my best man. You're my oldest friend, and that means something." Daniel almost said no. He had a product launch, a board meeting, 17 fires that needed putting out. But something in Nathan's voice, something earnest and unguarded, broke through his usual defenses. "I'll be there," Daniel heard himself say. The wedding was at a restored barn venue outside Cincinnati on a perfect September evening. String lights, wildflowers, golden hour light that made everything look like a painting. Daniel showed up in a suit that probably cost more than the entire catering budget, feeling overdressed and out of place among Nathan's law school friends and Sarah's nursing colleagues who actually knew how to relax. He gave a toast that was too short and too stiff, his public speaking skills honed for boardrooms, not celebrations. But Nathan hugged him anyway, genuine gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you for coming, brother. I know you're busy." The reception was winding down when Daniel noticed her. She sat alone at a table near the dance floor, scrolling through her phone with a slight frown. Her dress was emerald green, elegant but understated. Dark hair fell in loose waves over bare shoulders. When she looked up as he approached, her eyes were the kind of brown that seemed warm even in dim light. "Hiding from the crowd?" Daniel asked, gesturing to the empty seats around her. Her smile started slow, then spread like sunrise. "Something like that. Weddings make me sentimental. Needed a minute to breathe." He sat without asking. They talked. She was funny in an understated way, self-deprecating about her pharmaceutical sales job, curious about his work, without being intrusive or overly impressed. She didn't recognize his name. That alone was intoxicating in a world where everyone usually Googled him within 5 minutes. When a slow song started, she stood and extended her hand. "Come on, workaholic. Even billionaires can dance." He wasn't sure how she knew about his net worth. Maybe Sarah had mentioned it, but in that moment, with her hand warm in his and the music soft around them, he didn't care. They exchanged numbers. He texted her the next morning. She replied within minutes. A week later, he flew her to Chicago. 2 weeks after that, she stayed the weekend. A month in, Daniel found himself rearranging board meetings to have dinner with her. Madison Michelle was unlike anyone he'd dated. She didn't want expensive jewelry. When he tried booking Michelin-starred restaurants, she suggested deep-dish pizza and Netflix instead. She laughed at his terrible jokes. She listened when he talked about his mother, really listened, her hand finding his across the table. "You know what I like about you?" she said one night, rain hammering against his penthouse windows, the city lights blurred and soft beyond the glass. "My sparkling personality," he joked. "Your loneliness," she said, turning to look at him with an expression that seemed almost vulnerable. "You wear it like armor. I get that. I've been there too." He kissed her then, and it felt like finally coming home to a place he'd been searching for his entire life. They dated for a year. During that time, Daniel started imagining things he'd never let himself imagine before. Sunday mornings, maybe kids, a life that meant something beyond quarterly earnings reports and market share. Nathan was happy for him at first. The 4 of them would have dinners together when Daniel visited Cincinnati. Madison, Daniel, Nathan, and Sarah. But something shifted around the 8-month mark. Nathan became quieter during those dinners. He'd watch Madison with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. Sarah, too, seemed more reserved around her, though never rude. Then, 11 months into the relationship, Nathan called, not for a casual catch-up. "I need to see you, Dan. In person. It's important." The tone sent ice through Daniel's veins. Nathan drove up to Chicago and met him at his office after hours when the floor was empty and the only sound was the hum of computers in sleep mode. Nathan looked like he hadn't slept. His tie was loose, his usual easy demeanor replaced by something heavy and dark. "Before you react," Nathan said, sitting across from Daniel in the glass-walled conference room, "just listen. Hear me out completely." Daniel's stomach tightened. "Okay?" Nathan slid a thick folder across the table. "I hired a private investigator. I know how that sounds. I know you're going to be angry. But I had to know, Dan. For your sake." Daniel opened the folder with hands that had gone cold. Inside were financial records, screenshots, even surveillance photos. His eyes scanned pages without comprehending. "Madison isn't who she says she is," Nathan continued, his voice careful, like he was defusing a bomb. "She has a history, 3 previous relationships with wealthy men, each ended with quiet settlements, under-the-table payouts. There's an LLC registered in Delaware under her name. It's a shell company, Dan. She's been doing this for years." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Doing what exactly?" "Professional gold digging." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. "That's a hell of an accusation," Daniel said quietly. "There's more." Nathan pulled out a small digital recorder. His hand shook slightly as he pressed play. The audio was muffled, clearly recorded at a distance. Background noise of a party. But the voices were unmistakable. Madison, younger, her laugh higher-pitched, and Sarah. "You really think you can land someone like that?" Sarah's voice, amused. "Why not?" Madison replied, her tone confident, almost cocky. "You don't marry for love, you marry for leverage. Find the whale before 35, Sarah. That's the whole game." The recording ended. Silence crashed into the room like a physical force. Daniel felt like he'd been gut-punched. His throat was tight, his vision blurred at the edges. When was this? College. Sarah and Madison were roommates sophomore year. Sarah had some old party recordings saved, just random nostalgia stuff. When I told her I was worried about you, she went back through them and found this. Daniel closed the folder slowly. His hands trembled. "So Sarah's in on this investigation too? You both went behind my back?" "We're trying to protect you." "I don't need protection." The words came out louder than he intended. Daniel stood pacing to the window overlooking the Chicago skyline, millions of lights stretching into darkness. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger. "You did this because you're jealous." "Jealous?" Nathan's voice rose with disbelief. "Of what?" "You have your perfect little life. Sarah, the house, the family you're planning. And now I finally have something good, someone who sees me as more than a bank account, and you can't stand it." Daniel turned, his eyes hard. "You want me to stay alone in my money? It makes you feel better about your own choices." Nathan stood too, his face flushing. "That's not fair, and you know it. You want me to be the workaholic who never figured it out, the cautionary tale you tell at dinner parties." Daniel's voice was cold now, a tone he usually reserved for hostile board members. "Get out." Nathan froze. "What?" "Get out of my office. Take your conspiracy theories and your paranoid recordings and get the hell out." "Dan, listen to yourself. You're not thinking clearly. The only mistake I made was trusting you with this." Daniel turned away, looking back out at the city. "We're done. Don't call me. Don't text. We're done." The silence stretched like a chasm opening. "I'm trying to save you from making a terrible mistake," Nathan said quietly, desperately. The terrible mistake was this conversation. Daniel didn't turn around. "Leave the folder. Leave my office." Leave my life." He heard Nathan's footsteps, slow and heavy, the folder landing on the table, the door opening, closing with a click that felt final as a coffin ceiling. Daniel stood at that window for an hour after Nathan left, the folder sitting on the table like an accusation. He should have looked through it more carefully, should have listened. But rage and hurt were louder than reason, drowning out everything except the certainty that Nathan was wrong, had to be wrong. He called Madison that night, told her he loved her. She said it back, her voice soft and warm. 3 months later, he proposed at that same barn where they'd met. She said yes with tears in her eyes that looked genuine. They were married in a small ceremony in Napa Valley, just immediate family and a few friends. His distant brother Marcus, whom Daniel barely spoke to, served as best man because Daniel had burned his only real friendship to ash. Nathan wasn't invited. Daniel didn't even tell him about the wedding, just erased him like deleting a file. The marriage was good. That was the cruelest part looking back. It was good. Madison was attentive, affectionate at the right times, supportive when he needed it. She moved into his penthouse, redecorated with warm colors and soft textures that made the space feel less like a showroom. She'd cook occasionally, though she preferred ordering from the best restaurants in Chicago. She was careful with money, never extravagant, which he appreciated. Their physical relationship was regular, but Madison always insisted on protection. "I'm just not ready to be a mom yet," she'd say, her fingers trailing across his chest. "I want to enjoy being your wife first. That okay?" It was more than okay. He respected her autonomy, her timeline. He was in no rush. But there were small things, tiny fractures in the facade, that he explained away because he wanted to believe. The way she'd leave the room when certain calls came in, the password on her phone that changed every few weeks, the vague mentions of lunch with a friend that never included names or details. He told himself he was being paranoid, that Nathan's accusations had poisoned his mind, that Madison deserved his trust. For 2 years he convinced himself the marriage was everything he'd ever wanted. Then came that Tuesday in October. Daniel woke with restlessness under his skin, the kind that makes you feel like you're missing something important. He'd been working 80-hour weeks for 2 months straight, closing a major acquisition to expand overseas. The deal was done, the contracts were signed, and he was bone-tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. Over breakfast, Madison kissed his forehead and asked about his day. He mentioned his afternoon board meeting. She smiled, wished him luck, said she had errands to run. Nothing specific, just errands. He left at 9, his driver navigating morning traffic toward downtown. But halfway there, the restlessness crystallized into an idea. When was the last time he'd surprised Madison? When was the last time he'd done something spontaneous, something his mother would have wanted him to do? He called his assistant, rescheduled the board meeting, called a travel concierge, booked 2 nights at a resort in Door County, Wisconsin. A quiet place on the water where they'd spent a weekend early in their relationship. He'd surprise her, pack a bag, whisk her away. He texted her, "Change of plans. Taking the day off. Let's do something spontaneous." Her reply came quickly. "Oh, babe, I'm in the middle of errands. Can we do tonight instead?" Perfect. That gave him time to plan, to pack, to make it special. He told his driver to take him home. The penthouse was in Chicago's Gold Coast, a sleek high-rise with private elevators and a doorman trained not to ask questions. Daniel got out a block away on impulse, deciding to walk the rest. The October air was crisp, leaves skittering across the sidewalk. He felt lighter than he had in months. He entered through the lobby, nodded at the doorman, took the elevator to the 42nd floor. The hallway was silent, carpeted in thick gray that swallowed sound. He unlocked the door quietly, thinking he'd call out to Madison, but something stopped him. Voices, faint, coming from upstairs, the master suite. Male voices, 2 of them. His first thought was maintenance. Maybe she'd called someone about the temperamental thermostat. But the voices were too relaxed, too casual. And then he heard her laugh. That laugh he knew so intimately, warm and easy and completely at home. Daniel's heart kicked into a different rhythm. Everything slowed. He moved toward the staircase, his footsteps silent on marble. He didn't call out. Some instinct, primal and cold, told him to stay quiet. He climbed slowly, his hand on the brushed steel railing. The voices grew clearer. "The timeline is perfect." A male voice Daniel didn't recognize. Smooth, confident, professional. "Once the papers are filed, he won't have time to mount a proper defense." "And you're certain the mental incompetency angle will hold?" Another male voice. This one Daniel recognized instantly, and it sent ice straight through his chest. David Crane, his COO, the man who'd helped him close the acquisition deal just last week. "It's airtight," the unfamiliar voice continued. "We have documented instances of erratic behavior during the acquisition talks. Board members willing to testify he's been under severe mental strain. Once we initiate the divorce and the mental incompetency clause is triggered, that gullible, desperate man won't know what hit him." Madison's voice, clear and cold as winter. "He's been desperate from the beginning. You should have seen him after we met. Practically begging for affection like a puppy. Men like that are easy. You just make them feel seen and they'll hand you everything." Laughter. All three of them. "The company will be ours within 6 months, Crane said. "We've already seeded the new venture with his capital and client lists. Once we push him out of his own boardroom, we step in and absorb what's left. The clients will follow us, not him. And I walk away with half his assets in the divorce," Madison added. There was no warmth in her voice now, no trace of the woman who'd kissed him that morning. "Maybe more if the incompetency sticks, and we can prove he's unfit to manage his own affairs." More laughter. Daniel stopped breathing. His back hit the wall. His vision tunneled. The expensive artwork on the walls blurred into meaningless colors. His chest felt like it was caving in, ribs cracking inward. Gullible, desperate, easy. The words looped in his head, spoken in her voice, the voice he'd trusted with everything. He didn't rush in screaming, didn't confront them. That same cold instinct that had built his empire took over, corporate and calculating even in devastation. He turned and walked back down the stairs, moving like a ghost through his own home. Out the door, into the elevator, through the lobby. The doorman asked if everything was all right. Daniel nodded, said something about forgetting a file. His voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. He walked. No destination. Just walked through the Gold Coast while his world disintegrated behind him. Past boutiques and cafes, past people living normal lives, unaware that his entire existence had just been revealed as a carefully constructed con. He ended up in Lincoln Park, sitting on a bench near the pond. Ducks floated on the water. Families pushed strollers. The world kept turning, indifferent to the fact that Daniel Brooke had just discovered he was nothing more than a mark, a whale, leverage. He had no one. His mother was gone. His brother Marcus was practically a stranger. And Nathan, the one person who'd actually tried to save him, the one person who'd risked their friendship to warn him, was gone too. Erased by Daniel's own pride and stupidity. The sun set. Temperature dropped. Daniel sat on that bench as the park emptied, as streetlights flickered on, as evening joggers passed and gave him concerned looks. He thought about Nathan's words from 2 years ago. "I'm trying to save you from making a terrible mistake." He thought about the folder Nathan had left, the one Daniel had thrown in the trash without fully reading. He thought about the recording. "You don't marry for love, you marry for leverage." And he thought about how catastrophically, completely alone he was. His phone buzzed, a text from Madison. "Hey babe, where are you? Getting worried? Dinner soon? She had no idea he'd been home. No idea he'd heard everything. She was still playing the role, still performing the loving wife, waiting for her Mark to come home. The rage that had been simmering beneath the shock suddenly ignited. But it wasn't hot rage. It was cold, calculating. The same clarity he felt when outmaneuvering a competitor or restructuring a failing division. They thought he was gullible, foolish, desperate. They thought they'd already won. Daniel stood from the bench. His legs were stiff, but his mind was laser-focused. He knew what he had to do, but he couldn't do it alone. He pulled up his contacts, found the name he'd deleted, and re-added a dozen times over the past 2 years. His thumb hovered over the call button. Pride screamed at him not to. Shame told him he didn't deserve to. But survival, cold and clear, told him Nathan Cole was the only person who could help him now. He pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Daniel almost hung up. Then, hello? Nathan's voice cautious and surprised. Daniel's throat closed. For a moment he couldn't speak. Dan? Nathan said quietly. That you? Yeah, Daniel managed. It's me. A pause. You okay? No. The word came out broken. I need to see you. Tonight. I'll drive down. Another pause, longer. Daniel could hear the calculation, the wariness of someone who'd been burned before. Then, okay, come over. Nathan, just come, Dan. We'll figure it out. Daniel hung up and walked back to where he'd left his car. The drive to Cincinnati took 4.5 hours. He didn't stop, didn't eat, didn't let himself think about anything except Madison's laugh, Crane's smug confidence, the casual cruelty of being called easy. He arrived at Nathan's house just after midnight. It was a modest 2-story in a quiet suburb, the kind of neighborhood with sidewalks and porch lights and kids' bikes in driveways. Nathan's car sat in the driveway. The living room light was on. Daniel sat in his car for a full minute, staring at that lit window. Then he got out and walked to the front door. He knocked. Nathan answered within seconds, like he'd been waiting by the door. He wore sweatpants and an old Ohio State t-shirt. His hair was messy. He took one look at Daniel's face, at the rumpled suit and hollow eyes, and didn't say a word. Just stepped aside and opened the door wider. Daniel walked in. The house smelled like coffee and laundry detergent. Family photos lined the walls, small shoes by the door. Sarah was pregnant now, Daniel remembered vaguely. Nathan had mentioned it in one of the texts Daniel had ignored. Nathan led him to the living room and gestured to the couch. Daniel sat. Nathan disappeared into the kitchen and returned with 2 mugs of coffee, setting one in front of Daniel before sitting in the chair across from him. Neither spoke for a long moment. Then Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper, "You were right." Nathan's expression didn't change, just waited. About Madison, about all of it. Daniel wrapped his hands around the coffee mug but didn't drink. I heard her today, talking with my COO and some lawyer. They're planning to divorce me, claim I'm mentally incompetent, and take my company. Nathan exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging. Jesus, Dan. She called me gullible, desperate, said I was easy because I was so starved for affection. Daniel's voice cracked. He looked up at Nathan, and his eyes were wet. You tried to tell me. You tried to save me, and I called you jealous. I cut you out of my life because you cared enough to warn me, and I was too proud and too stupid to listen. Nathan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Dan! I don't have anyone else, Daniel interrupted. Not a single person in this world I can trust, except you. And I burned that bridge because I couldn't handle the truth. He wiped his eyes roughly. I don't deserve your help, but I'm asking anyway. I'm begging. Please. Nathan was quiet. The house settled around them with small creaks. Somewhere upstairs, a clock chimed once. Then Nathan said simply, You didn't burn it. Daniel looked at him, disbelieving. The bridge, Nathan continued, his voice steady. You didn't burn it. You're here, aren't you? You came to me. That's what matters. I don't deserve... Probably not, Nathan said, and there was the ghost of a smile. But you're getting it anyway. That's what brothers do. The relief that crashed over Daniel was so overwhelming, he had to set the coffee down before he dropped it. He put his face in his hands and let out a shuddering breath that might have been a sob. Nathan moved to sit beside him on the couch. Didn't say anything, just put a hand on Daniel's shoulder and waited. When Daniel finally looked up, his face was blotchy, but his eyes were clear. I need to fight back. I need to destroy them before they destroy me. Then we fight, Nathan said. No hesitation, no conditions. I have no plan, no evidence beyond what I overheard. Nathan stood and walked to the hall closet. He pulled a box from the top shelf and brought it back, setting it on the coffee table. Inside was the folder from 2 years ago, but thicker now. Additional documents, notes, a USB drive. I never stopped, Nathan admitted quietly. Even after you cut me off. I kept investigating. Part of me hoped I was wrong, but I also wanted to be ready in case you ever came back. Daniel stared at the box. You kept investigating for 2 years? I kept hoping for 2 years. Nathan pulled out updated documents. Madison's LLC has offshore accounts now. Cayman Islands. There are wire transfer records that line up with when her previous relationships ended. And I've got more on Crane. He spread photos across the table. Madison and Crane at hotels, restaurants, always during Daniel's work hours. He's been siphoning capital and clients, Nathan explained. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger immediate alarms. But over the past 18 months, he's moved about $8 million into a shadow company. They're building your competitor, Dan. Once they push you out and claim incompetency, they'll take over your company and merge it with theirs. Your clients, your technology, everything. It's a hostile takeover disguised as a divorce. Daniel felt the rage solidify into something harder, sharper. How do we stop them? Nathan sat back. We need a lawyer, someone ruthless, someone who specializes in this kind of warfare. Veronica Hayes, Daniel said immediately. She handled litigation during my Series C funding. She's a killer. Good. We also need to protect your assets. If they file and trigger that incompetency claim, they'll try to freeze everything. We need to move first. What do you suggest? Nathan leaned forward, his expression intense. We set a trap. Make them think they're winning. Then pull the rug out. They talked until 3 in the morning, mapping strategy with military precision. Sarah came down at one point, pregnant and tired, saw them surrounded by documents and coffee cups. She didn't ask questions. Just kissed Nathan's head and told them there was leftover lasagna in the fridge if they got hungry. When Daniel finally left as dawn broke, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like he had a brother again. And if you're wondering how this story ends, drop a comment below. Because what happens next is going to blow your mind. Veronica Hayes agreed to meet Daniel the next day in her downtown Chicago office. She was in her 50s, silver hair cut in a severe bob, sharp features, and a reputation for eviscerating opposing counsel so thoroughly they'd need therapy after. Daniel and Nathan laid out everything. The overheard conversation, the investigation, the offshore accounts, the shadow company. Veronica listened without interrupting, her fingers steepled under her chin. When they finished, she said, "They're going nuclear. Incompetency claims in divorce are rare because they're hard to prove. But if they've got board members willing to testify, if they can establish a pattern of instability, it could work. At minimum, you'd be tied up in court for years while they strip the company." "Can we stop it?" Daniel asked. "We can do better than stop it." Veronica's smile was cold and sharp. "We can make them regret they ever tried." Over the next 2 weeks, they worked in absolute secrecy. Daniel told no one at work, maintained his normal schedule, acted like nothing had changed. At home, he was the devoted husband, kissing Madison goodbye, asking about her day, suggesting weekend trips she'd decline with vague excuses. Meanwhile, Veronica crafted a legal masterpiece. They created an irrevocable trust, transferring all of Daniel's liquid assets, real estate holdings, and non-company investments into it. Nathan Cole was named trustee, giving him legal control. On paper, Daniel Brooke was no longer a billionaire. He was a man facing financial crisis. It was dangerous. If Madison or Crane discovered the trust before filing, they'd adjust their strategy. But Veronica was confident. They're arrogant. They think you're too blind to see them coming. We use that. Daniel played his part perfectly. At the office, he seemed scattered, missed meetings or showed up late, asked the same questions twice in board sessions, left financial reports on his desk that suggested liquidity problems, cash flow issues. His assistant, loyal and in on the plan, made sure these documents were visible when Crane visited Daniel's office. At home, he was the oblivious Mark, suggesting date nights Madison would postpone, talking about future plans she'd deflect, never letting on that he knew. It was Nathan's investigator who captured the final piece of evidence, a legal audio recording device planted in a hotel conference room where Madison, Crane, and the lawyer met. Illinois was a one-party consent state, and the investigator had posed as hotel staff to gain access. The recording was damning. "We file in 3 weeks," the lawyer's voice, Gerald Finch. "Right after his New York trip. We claim he had a breakdown during travel. Use the board testimonies about erratic behavior. File for emergency control of assets pending psychological evaluation. Once we have control," Crane added, "we liquidate his shares, move them into the new venture. The company will tank without proper leadership, but will already be gone." "What about Daniel?" Madison asked. "He'll be fighting the incompetency claim for months," Finch replied. "By the time he realizes what happened, we'll be untouchable and rich." Laughter. That same cruel laughter Daniel had heard in his hallway. Veronica listened to the recording twice. Then she looked at Daniel with something like admiration. "They just gave us everything?" The trap was set. Now they just had to wait. Madison filed for divorce on a Friday morning, exactly 3 weeks later. Daniel was in his office when a courier arrived, apologetic and professional. Daniel opened the envelope with hands that didn't shake because he'd been expecting this. The petition was brutal. Claims of emotional neglect, erratic behavior, inability to manage personal or professional affairs. A request for immediate control of marital assets, including company stock, pending a psychological evaluation to determine his fitness. He called Veronica. "They filed," he said calmly. "Perfect. We respond Monday. Let them think they're ahead for the weekend." That weekend was the longest of Daniel's life. He stayed at a hotel, didn't want to risk seeing Madison and losing his composure. Nathan drove up Saturday, and they went through the plan one more time, making sure every piece was in place. "You ready?" Nathan asked. Daniel looked out the hotel window at the city below, the city where he'd built everything, lost everything, and was about to reclaim everything. "I've been ready since I heard her laugh at me." Monday morning, Veronica filed a response that was less a defense and more a declaration of war. It included everything: Nathan's original investigation, updated with new evidence, Madison's previous relationships and the quiet settlements, the offshore LLC and bank accounts, the surveillance photos of her with Crane, the recordings of all 3 conspirators discussing the incompetency strategy. But the masterpiece was the trust. Veronica's filing showed that Daniel had transferred his assets weeks before the divorce petition, a legal and preemptive protective measure. Not dissipation, which would be illegal, protection. The kind of smart move a competent person makes when they suspect financial malfeasance. And then Veronica went thermonuclear. She filed criminal complaints against Crane for embezzlement and corporate fraud, civil suits against Madison for fraud and conspiracy, and she invoked elder financial abuse statutes. "Wait," Daniel had said when she explained this part. "I'm 36. How is that elder abuse?" "The statute defines vulnerable adult as anyone targeted due to diminished capacity," Veronica explained with a razor smile. "Their own filing claims you were mentally unstable and unable to manage affairs. If that's true, their actions constitute financial exploitation of a vulnerable person. If it's not true, their filing is fraudulent. Either way, they're screwed." It was legal judo at its finest, using their own strategy to destroy them. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Crane was suspended from his COO position pending investigation. The board, realizing they'd been manipulated into signing statements about Daniel's supposed instability, scrambled to distance themselves. 2 members resigned immediately. The company's stock dipped initially, but Veronica had prepared for that. She released a statement on Daniel's behalf, calm and measured, explaining the situation and reassuring investors that the company was stable under his leadership. The stock recovered within 48 hours. Madison's lawyer, Gerald Finch, tried to withdraw from the case. Veronica blocked it, forcing him to stay and face the consequences of his own strategy. The media caught wind of the story within days. "Tech billionaire outsmarts gold digger wife" ran one headline. "The divorce that became a takedown" read another. Daniel hated the attention, but Veronica assured him it was working in their favor. "Public opinion matters. The narrative is you're the victim who fought back smart. That plays well with juries and judges." The divorce proceedings turned into a spectacle. Madison's legal team tried desperately to salvage the incompetency claim, but the recordings destroyed any credibility. They tried to argue the trust was dissipation of assets, but Veronica proved it was protective. They tried to claim emotional distress, but the evidence of Madison's calculated con obliterated any sympathy. Then Crane, facing serious criminal charges, made a choice that sealed everyone's fate. He flipped. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he testified against Madison, laid out the entire scheme in excruciating detail. How Madison had identified Daniel as a target through Sarah years ago. How she'd orchestrated the meeting at Nathan's wedding. How every moment of their relationship had been calculated, from her preference for pizza over fancy restaurants to her insistence on birth control. "It was her plan from the beginning," Crane said on the stand, his voice hollow, his career destroyed. "She recruited me 6 months into her marriage to Daniel. Told me we could take his entire company if we played it right. The divorce, the incompetency angle, all of it was her design. I just helped execute it." "And the affair?" Veronica asked. Crane's face flushed. "Part of the plan. She said it would help with the divorce, show he couldn't satisfy her, make him look worse." Madison sat in the courtroom throughout Crane's testimony, her face a mask of cold composure. But when the judge denied her petition for any portion of Daniel's assets and instead ordered her to pay restitution for fraud, something in that mask cracked. She looked across the courtroom at Daniel, and for the first time, he saw fear in her eyes. The criminal trial followed swiftly. Both Madison and Crane were convicted on multiple counts: fraud, conspiracy, attempted extortion. Gerald Finch, the lawyer, was disbarred and faced his own charges for legal malpractice and conspiracy. The sentencing hearing was held on a gray November morning, 6 months after Daniel had heard those voices in his penthouse. The courtroom was packed with journalists, legal observers, and a handful of Daniel's employees who'd asked to attend to show support. Daniel sat in the front row beside Veronica, his expression neutral. Nathan sat behind him, a quiet presence of solidarity. Madison was brought in first. She wore a gray suit that looked nothing like the elegant clothes she used to favor. Her hair was pulled back severely. She didn't look at Daniel as she took her seat. The prosecutor laid out the charges methodically. Fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted extortion, identity theft related to the shell company. The recommended sentence was 8 to 12 years. Madison's public defender made a weak argument about her difficult childhood, about pressure and poor choices. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the financial trail, Crane's testimony. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, Madison stood slowly. For a moment, Daniel thought she might apologize, might show some flicker of remorse. Instead, she turned and looked directly at him. "You were supposed to be easy," she said, her voice flat and cold. "Just another lonely rich man who'd pay anything to feel loved. That's what you were. Pathetic and desperate." The courtroom went completely silent. "I gave you 2 years of my life," she continued, her composure cracking now, anger bleeding through. "And you couldn't even have the decency to just let it end quietly. You had to destroy everything." Veronica started to object, but Daniel put a hand on her arm. He stood slowly and met Madison's gaze across the courtroom. "No," he said quietly, but his voice carried. "You destroyed everything. I just survived it." The judge's gavel came down hard. "That's enough, Ms. Michelle. Sit down." Madison stared at Daniel for another moment, and he saw it then, the full weight of her miscalculation. She'd thought he was weak, thought his loneliness made him easy prey. She'd confused kindness for weakness, vulnerability for stupidity. She'd been wrong. The judge sentenced her to 10 years. Crane got 7 with possibility of parole in 5 due to his cooperation. Finch got 3 years and permanent disbarment. As they were let out, Madison looked back once more. The fear Daniel had seen before was gone, replaced by pure hatred. He met her gaze and felt nothing. Not triumph, not vindication, just a cold, distant finality. It was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Veronica handled them with practiced efficiency while Daniel slipped into a waiting car. Nathan was already inside, having left through a side entrance. "How do you feel?" Nathan asked as the car pulled away from the chaos. Daniel leaned back against the seat and closed his eyes. "Tired, empty. I don't know." "That's normal." "Is it?" Daniel opened his eyes and looked at his friend. "I keep waiting to feel something. Relief, satisfaction, anything. But I just feel hollow." "The betrayal took something from you," Nathan said carefully. "Getting justice doesn't automatically give it back. That takes time." They drove in silence for a while, Chicago passing by outside the tinted windows. Then Daniel said, "Thank you. For everything. For not giving up on me even when I gave up on you." "You didn't give up on me," Nathan replied. "You made a mistake. That's different. I called you jealous. I erased you from my life." "And then you came back," Nathan said, looking at him steadily. "That's what matters, Dan, not the mistake, the coming back. If this story is hitting you differently than you expected, hit that like button. And stick around, because this isn't where it ends." The company recovered faster than anyone predicted. Within 3 months of Crane's removal, Daniel had restructured the entire executive team. He promoted from within, people who'd been with him for years, people who'd proven their loyalty through the chaos. The stock didn't just recover, it surged to new highs as investors saw the leadership stability. But Daniel found himself pulling back from the day-to-day operations in a way he never had before. He hired a new COO, a woman named Patricia Reeves, who'd turned around 2 failing logistics companies and had a reputation for both brilliance and uncompromising integrity. He started delegating more, trusting more carefully, but trusting nonetheless. He also started living. He took weekends off. Actual weekends where he didn't check email or take calls. He went to see his mother's grave in Columbus and spent an afternoon telling her everything that had happened, everything he'd survived. He joined Nathan and Sarah for Sunday dinners, becoming a regular fixture in their lives as Sarah's pregnancy progressed. When Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Emma, Daniel was at the hospital within hours. He held the tiny infant with careful hands and felt something shift in his chest, some locked door opening. "You're going to be a great uncle," Sarah said from the hospital bed, exhausted but radiant. Uncle, Daniel repeated, testing the word. He'd never had family beyond his mother. Now he had this. A brother in everything but blood. A sister-in-law who'd helped save him. A niece who would never know what her parents had done for him. Uncle Dan, Nathan said with a grin, standing beside him. Has a nice ring to it. Daniel looked down at Emma's tiny face, her eyes closed, completely trusting. I'm not going to let you down, he whispered. Any of you. The legal bills were astronomical, but Daniel didn't care. Veronica had earned every dollar and then some. When the dust finally settled and all the cases were closed, he invited her to dinner at one of Chicago's best restaurants. I want to do something more, he told her over wine. Something with the foundation. Daniel had a charitable foundation he'd established years ago but largely ignored, letting his financial advisors manage the token donations. Now he wanted to expand it, give it real purpose. I'm thinking support for domestic abuse victims, he said. Not just physical abuse, financial abuse, emotional manipulation, all of it. Legal support, counseling, job training, help people rebuild after someone tried to destroy them. Veronica studied him across the table. That's personal. It should be, Daniel replied. I had resources to fight back. Most people don't. I want to change that. They spent the next hour discussing logistics, Veronica helping him navigate the legal framework for expanding the foundation. When they finally left the restaurant, she paused on the sidewalk. You know what's remarkable, she said. What? Most people who go through what you went through become bitter, cynical. They close off completely. She looked at him with something like respect. You're doing the opposite. You're opening up, helping others. That takes real strength. Daniel thought about that as he drove home to his penthouse, the one he'd almost lost, the one where he'd overheard his world ending. He'd thought about selling it, starting fresh somewhere else, but Veronica had convinced him not to. Don't let her take your home, she'd said. Reclaim it. So he'd renovated, repainted, changed all the furniture, filled it with art that meant something to him, not just expensive pieces for show. Photos of his mother, of Nathan and Sarah and baby Emma, of the life he was building after the ashes. The penthouse didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt like his, but the real change wasn't in the apartment or the company or even the foundation. The real change was in Daniel himself. He started therapy, something Nathan's wife Sarah had gently suggested over one of their Sunday dinners. Just to process everything, she'd said. Betrayal like that leaves marks even when you win. His therapist, Dr. Patricia Chen, was in her 40s, calm and insightful without being condescending. She helped him understand that his vulnerability to Madison wasn't weakness. It was human need, something everyone has, something his workaholic lifestyle had left unfulfilled. You weren't gullible, Dr. Chen told him during one session. You were lonely and she exploited that. Those are very different things. I ignored the warning signs, Daniel said. Nathan tried to tell me and I shut him out. Because you wanted to believe, she replied. That's not stupidity, that's hope. The tragedy is that she used your hope against you. The sessions helped. Slowly, painfully, Daniel started to forgive himself for the choices he'd made, for the friend he'd hurt, for the 2 years he'd lost to a con. He also started dating again, cautiously at first. A few dinners here and there, nothing serious. He was hyper-aware of red flags now, maybe too aware. But he didn't let the betrayal make him cynical. He just learned to trust slowly, to verify words with actions over time. He spent more time with Nathan's family, becoming the uncle he'd promised to be. He taught Emma to hold a bottle at 2 months old, changed diapers with fumbling incompetence that made Nathan and Sarah laugh, showed up for the 3 a.m. crying sessions when they needed an extra pair of hands. He also reconnected with his brother Marcus, the relationship he'd let atrophy over years of focusing only on work. Marcus and his wife invited Daniel to Cleveland for Thanksgiving, and Daniel went. Met his nephews properly for the first time, sat at a normal dinner table with normal people living normal lives, and didn't feel like an outsider anymore. "You seem different," Marcus said one evening after the kids were in bed. "Lighter somehow." "I went through hell," Daniel replied honestly, "but I came out the other side." "Nathan told me some of it," Marcus admitted. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you." "I wasn't exactly available," Daniel said. "I made work my entire life, but I'm trying to change that." Marcus nodded. "Good. Because family matters, Dan. Money doesn't mean anything if you're alone." It was a simple truth, the kind Daniel's mother had tried to teach him before she died. He was finally learning to hear it. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, Madison stood slowly. For a moment, Daniel thought she might apologize, might show some flicker of remorse. Instead, she turned and looked directly at him. "You were supposed to be easy," she said, her voice flat and cold. "Just another lonely rich man who'd pay anything to feel loved. That's what you were. Pathetic and desperate." The courtroom went completely silent. "I gave you 2 years of my life," she continued, her composure cracking now, anger bleeding through. "And you couldn't even have the decency to just let it end quietly. You had to destroy everything." Veronica started to object, but Daniel put a hand on her arm. He stood slowly and met Madison's gaze across the courtroom. "No," he said quietly, but his voice carried. "You destroyed everything. I just survived it." The judge's gavel came down hard. "That's enough, Ms. Michelle. Sit down." Madison stared at Daniel for another moment, and he saw it then, the full weight of her miscalculation. She'd thought he was weak, thought his loneliness made him easy prey. She'd confused kindness for weakness, vulnerability for stupidity. She'd been wrong. The judge sentenced her to 10 years. Crane got 7 with possibility of parole in 5 due to his cooperation. Finch got 3 years and permanent disbarment. As they were let out, Madison looked back once more. The fear Daniel had seen before was gone, replaced by pure hatred. He met her gaze and felt nothing, not triumph, not vindication, just a cold, distant finality. It was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Veronica handled them with practiced efficiency while Daniel slipped into a waiting car. Nathan was already inside, having left through a side entrance. "How do you feel?" Nathan asked as the car pulled away from the chaos. Daniel leaned back against the seat and closed his eyes. "Tired? Empty? I don't know." "That's normal." "Is it?" Daniel opened his eyes and looked at his friend. "I keep waiting to feel something. Relief, satisfaction, anything. But I just feel hollow." "The betrayal took something from you," Nathan said carefully. "Getting justice doesn't automatically give it back. That takes time." They drove in silence for a while, Chicago passing by outside the tinted windows. Then Daniel said, "Thank you. For everything. For not giving up on me even when I gave up on you." "You didn't give up on me," Nathan replied. "You made a mistake. That's different." "I called you jealous. I erased you from my life." "And then you came back," Nathan said, looking at him steadily. "That's what matters, Dan. Not the mistake. The coming back." If this story is hitting you differently than you expected, hit that like button. And stick around, because this isn't where it ends. The company recovered faster than anyone predicted. Within 3 months of Crane's removal, Daniel had restructured the entire executive team. He promoted from within, people who'd been with him for years, people who'd proven their loyalty through the chaos. The stock didn't just recover, it surged to new highs as investors saw the leadership stability. But Daniel found himself pulling back from the day-to-day operations in a way he never had before. He hired a new COO, a woman named Patricia Reeves, who'd turned around 2 failing logistics companies and had a reputation for both brilliance and uncompromising integrity. He started delegating more, trusting more carefully, but trusting nonetheless. He also started living. He took weekends off, actual weekends where he didn't check email or take calls. He went to see his mother's grave in Columbus and spent an afternoon telling her everything that had happened, everything he'd survived. He joined Nathan and Sarah for Sunday dinners, becoming a regular fixture in their lives as Sarah's pregnancy progressed. When Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Emma, Daniel was at the hospital within hours. He held the tiny infant with careful hands and felt something shift in his chest, some locked door opening. "You're going to be a great uncle," Sarah said from the hospital bed, exhausted but radiant. "Uncle," Daniel repeated, testing the word. He'd never had family beyond his mother. Now he had this, a brother in everything but blood, a sister-in-law who'd helped save him, a niece who would never know what her parents had done for him. "Uncle Dan," Nathan said with a grin, standing beside him, "has a nice ring to it." Daniel looked down at Emma's tiny face, her eyes closed, completely trusting. "I'm not going to let you down," he whispered. "Any of you." The legal bills were astronomical, but Daniel didn't care. Veronica had earned every dollar, and then some. When the dust finally settled and all the cases were closed, he invited her to dinner at one of Chicago's best restaurants. "I want to do something more," he told her over wine. "Something with the foundation." Daniel had a charitable foundation he'd established years ago but largely ignored, letting his financial advisors manage the token donations. Now he wanted to expand it, give it real purpose. "I'm thinking support for domestic abuse victims," he said. "Not just physical abuse, financial abuse, emotional manipulation, all of it. Legal support, counseling, job training. Help people rebuild after someone tried to destroy them." Veronica studied him across the table. "That's personal." "It should be," Daniel replied. "I had resources to fight back. Most people don't. I want to change that." They spent the next hour discussing logistics, Veronica helping him navigate the legal framework for expanding the foundation. When they finally left the restaurant, she paused on the sidewalk. "You know what's remarkable?" she said. "What?" "Most people who go through what you went through become bitter, cynical. They close off completely." She looked at him with something like respect. "You're doing the opposite. You're opening up, helping others. That takes real strength." Daniel thought about that as he drove home to his penthouse, the one he'd almost lost. The one where he'd overheard his world ending. He'd thought about selling it, starting fresh somewhere else, but Veronica had convinced him not to. "Don't let her take your home," she'd said. "Reclaim it." So he'd renovated, repainted, changed all the furniture, filled it with art that meant something to him, not just expensive pieces for show. Photos of his mother, of Nathan and Sarah and baby Emma, of the life he was building after the ashes. The penthouse didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt like his. But the real change wasn't in the apartment or the company, or even the foundation. The real change was in Daniel himself. He started therapy, something Nathan's wife Sarah had gently suggested over one of their Sunday dinners. "Just to process everything," she'd said. "Betrayal like that leaves marks even when you win." His therapist, Dr. Patricia Chen, was in her 40s, calm and insightful, without being condescending. She helped him understand that his vulnerability to Madison wasn't weakness. It was human need, something everyone has, something his workaholic lifestyle had left unfulfilled. "You weren't gullible," Dr. Chen told him during one session. "You were lonely, and she exploited that. Those are very different things." "I ignored the warning signs," Daniel said. "Nathan tried to tell me, and I shut him out." "Because you wanted to believe," she replied. "That's not stupidity. That's hope. The tragedy is that she used your hope against you. The sessions helped. Slowly, painfully, Daniel started to forgive himself for the choices he'd made, for the friend he'd hurt, for the 2 years he'd lost to a con. He also started dating again, cautiously at first, a few dinners here and there. Nothing serious. He was hyper-aware of red flags now, maybe too aware. But he didn't let the betrayal make him cynical. He just learned to trust slowly, to verify words with actions over time. He spent more time with Nathan's family, becoming the uncle he'd promised to be. He taught Emma to hold a bottle at 2 months old, changed diapers with fumbling incompetence that made Nathan and Sarah laugh, showed up for the 3 a.m. crying sessions when they needed an extra pair of hands. He also reconnected with his brother Marcus, the relationship he'd let atrophy over years of focusing only on work. Marcus and his wife invited Daniel to Cleveland for Thanksgiving, and Daniel went. Met his nephews properly for the first time, sat at a normal dinner table with normal people living normal lives, and didn't feel like an outsider anymore. "You seem different," Marcus said one evening after the kids were in bed. "Lighter somehow." "I went through hell," Daniel replied honestly, "but I came out the other side." "Nathan told me some of it," Marcus admitted. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you." "I wasn't exactly available," Daniel said. "I made work my entire life, but I'm trying to change that." Marcus nodded. "Good. Because family matters, Dan. Money doesn't mean anything if you're alone." It was a simple truth, the kind Daniel's mother had tried to teach him before she died. He was finally learning to hear it. The first anniversary of the day he'd overheard Madison's betrayal fell on a Tuesday. Daniel marked it privately, not with sadness, but with reflection. He drove out to Nathan's house unannounced, showing up in the late afternoon. Nathan answered the door with Emma on his hip, the now 1-year-old grabbing at his glasses. "Hey," Nathan said, surprised but pleased. "Didn't know you were coming." "Spontaneous visit," Daniel replied. "That okay?" "Always." They sat on Nathan's back deck while Emma played on a blanket nearby, Sarah inside making dinner. The late afternoon sun was warm, the yard green and alive. "You know what today is?" Daniel asked after a while. Nathan glanced at him. "Yeah, I know. I almost lost everything, my company, my assets, my freedom, everything I'd built. But you didn't. Because of you," Daniel said, turning to look at his friend. "You saved me, Nathan. And I don't just mean the legal strategy or the investigation. You opened your door when I showed up broken at midnight. You didn't say, 'I told you so.' You just said, 'Okay, now we fight.'" Nathan was quiet for a moment, watching Emma. "You'd have done the same for me." "I hope I never have to prove it," Daniel said. "But yeah, I would." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who've been through fire together. Then Nathan said, "You've changed, you know, in good ways." "How so?" "You smile more, laugh more. You're not just the company anymore. You're a person with a life." Nathan looked at him. "That's what your mom wanted, right? For you to live, not just build?" Daniel felt his throat tighten. "Yeah, that's what she wanted. She'd be proud of who you've become. Not the billionaire part, the rest of it." That night, after dinner with Nathan's family, after helping put Emma to bed and saying goodnight to Sarah, Daniel drove back to Chicago thinking about transformation. About how the worst thing that had ever happened to him had somehow led to becoming the person he was always supposed to be. The empire wasn't his greatest asset. Nathan had been trying to tell him that from the beginning. The greatest asset was the friend who'd tried to stop him from losing it all, and then helped him reclaim it when he did. 18 months after the trials ended, Daniel made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He stepped down as CEO. Not in disgrace, not forced out. He chose it. Patricia Reeves, who'd proven herself as COO beyond any question, was promoted to CEO. Daniel remained as chairman of the board, still involved in major decisions but no longer consumed by daily operations. "Are you sure about this?" Patricia asked when he told her. "I built this company to prove something," Daniel said. "To prove I wasn't that poor kid from Columbus anymore. But I don't need to prove that anymore. And you can take this company further than I ever could. You should." The transition was smooth. The board approved unanimously. The company continued to thrive under Patricia's leadership, and Daniel found himself with something he'd never had before: time. He used it to expand the foundation, personally visited domestic violence shelters and financial abuse recovery programs the foundation funded, sat down with survivors and listened to their stories, seeing pieces of his own experience reflected back. He funded legal clinics that specialized in helping people escape predatory relationships, financial or romantic. He also taught guest lectures at Northwestern's business school about the reality of entrepreneurship, the loneliness of success, the importance of maintaining relationships outside work. Students would come up afterward, thanking him for being honest about the costs, about the mistakes. "Everyone talks about the glory," one student said. "Nobody talks about losing yourself in the process." "Don't lose yourself," Daniel told her. "That's the real lesson. Build something great, but don't sacrifice everything to do it." He traveled too, but not to luxury resorts or exotic locations. He went to places his mother had dreamed of seeing. Ireland, where her grandparents had emigrated from. The Grand Canyon she'd talked about visiting but never did. He brought a small portion of her ashes and scattered them in each place, feeling her presence in the wind. In Ireland, on a rainy afternoon in a small coastal town, something unexpected happened. Daniel was in a bookshop trying to navigate the narrow aisles with a coffee cup when he literally bumped into someone. Books scattered. Coffee sloshed but didn't spill. "I'm so sorry," a woman's voice, laughing even as she bent to gather fallen paperbacks. "My fault entirely," Daniel replied, helping. "I'm told I take up too much space." She looked up at him then, and he saw her face properly. Dark red hair, green eyes, freckles across her nose. She was probably in her early 30s, dressed practically in jeans and a sweater, no makeup, completely natural. "You're American," she observed. "Guilty, Chicago." "I'm Maeve Brennan, local." She gathered her books, and Daniel couldn't help noticing they were all mysteries and romance novels, the kind with dramatic covers. "Terrible taste in literature?" he offered with a smile. She laughed, genuine and unself-conscious. "The absolute worst, but they make me happy, so who cares?" They talked for 20 minutes in that cramped bookshop. She was a social worker, in town visiting her elderly father. When Daniel mentioned he was traveling, scattering his mother's ashes, she didn't offer empty platitudes. "That's lovely," she said simply. "She'd appreciate you doing this." Before he could overthink it, Daniel asked if she'd like to grab dinner. She hesitated, then smiled. "Why not? I could use the company." They had dinner at a local pub, nothing fancy, and talked for 3 hours. She was funny, self-deprecating about her job's challenges, curious about his life without being invasive. When he eventually mentioned he owned a company, she didn't pry or change her demeanor. "What kind of company?" "Logistics. Very boring." "Everything's boring until you understand why it matters," Maeve said. "Why does it matter?" And Daniel found himself explaining not the technical details, but the impact. The small businesses that could compete with larger ones because his platform made shipping affordable. The jobs created, the efficiency that meant less waste, less environmental impact. Maeve listened like she actually cared. "So you make things work better. That's not boring at all." They exchanged numbers. Daniel stayed in Ireland an extra week, something he'd never done before on a business trip. They met for coffee, for walks along the cliffs, for quiet dinners where conversation flowed easily. On his last night sitting in that same pub, Maeve said, "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. You've been hurt. Recently, I think. I can see it in how you watch people, like you're looking for something false." Daniel's stomach clenched. "That obvious?" "Only because I've been there," she said gently. "Bad relationship. Not quite as dramatic as yours, I'm guessing, but bad enough." He told her. Not everything, but enough. The betrayal, the divorce, the fight to reclaim his life. She listened without judgment, without pity, just understanding. "Thank you for trusting me with that," she said when he finished. "Thank you for listening. Can I tell you something my therapist told me when I was recovering?" Maeve leaned forward. "She said betrayal teaches you what to avoid, but it shouldn't teach you to avoid everything. The trick is learning to see clearly without becoming cynical." "And have you?" Daniel asked. "Learned that trick?" Maeve smiled. "Still working on it, but I'm getting there." They started dating long distance. Daniel flew to Dublin once a month. Maeve visited Chicago twice, met Nathan and Sarah, held Emma, and made the toddler giggle. She fit into his life with surprising ease, not trying to change anything, just adding to it. She was different from Madison in every way that mattered. She had her own career, her own money, her own full life. She challenged him when he got too intense about work. She made him laugh. She showed up consistently, whether things were easy or hard, and crucially, she'd never heard of him before they met. When he finally explained the full extent of his wealth, she took it in stride. "Does that change things?" he asked nervously over dinner in Chicago. She considered seriously. "It means I need to make sure you know I'm with you for you, not your bank account. That'll take time and consistency. But no, it doesn't change how I feel." "How do you feel?" "I like you," she said simply. "I like who you are. The rest is just context. Simple, honest, real." They dated for a year and a half. Daniel learned to trust again, slowly, checking his instincts against Nathan's observations, against Dr. Chen's guidance. But mostly he just paid attention to Maeve's actions, and they consistently matched her words. She flew to Chicago for Emma's 3rd birthday party, helped Sarah with the decorations, played games with the toddlers, acted like a completely normal person at a completely normal kid's party. Daniel watched her laughing with Nathan over something, completely at ease, and felt something settle in his chest. Later, on Nathan's deck after the party chaos had calmed, Nathan pulled Daniel aside. "She's good for you," Nathan said quietly. "I know." "You going to marry her?" Daniel had been thinking about it for months. "Maybe. Eventually. When I'm sure." "Sure of what? That she's not Madison?" "Sure that I'm ready. That I can trust myself to see clearly." Nathan clapped his shoulder. "You already see clearly, Dan. That's the whole point. You learned." Inside, through the glass doors, Maeve was helping Emma stack blocks while Sarah supervised. The domestic scene felt both foreign and deeply right. "The Empire wasn't my greatest asset," Daniel said, almost to himself. "What?" Daniel turned to Nathan. "Something I should have understood years ago. The company, the money, the success. None of it was the greatest asset. It was you, the friend who tried to stop me from losing it all." Nathan's eyes got bright. "Brother, you're going to make me cry at my daughter's birthday party." "Can't have that," Daniel said, but he pulled Nathan into a hug anyway, fierce and brief. When he stepped back, Nathan said, "So what is the greatest asset now?" Daniel looked through the glass at Maeve and Emma, at Sarah joining them, at this life he'd rebuilt from ashes. This, all of this, the people who show up, the ones who tell hard truths, the life that matters beyond profit margins. Took you long enough to figure out? Better late than never. Fair enough. They stood there in comfortable silence as the sun set over Nathan's suburban yard. Two men who'd been through hell together and come out stronger on the other side. 2.5 years after the betrayal that almost destroyed him, Daniel Brooks stood on a dock at a lake house in Wisconsin. It was evening, the water calm, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. Maeve stood beside him, her hand in his. "This is beautiful," she said softly. "It belonged to Nathan," Daniel replied. "I gave it to him after everything. As thanks. And now? Now Nathan and Sarah use it for family vacations. But they said we could use it whenever we want. Said it should be filled with good memories." Maeve squeezed his hand. They'd been dating for almost 2 years now. She'd accepted a job transfer to Chicago 6 months ago, moved into her own apartment, but spent most nights at his place. They were building something real, taking it slow, making sure the foundation was solid. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said. "Always. Are you happy? With this? With us?" Maeve turned to look at him, her expression open and honest. "I'm very happy. Are you?" Daniel thought about it, really thought about it. 3 years ago, he'd been a workaholic billionaire who measured success in market share and quarterly earnings. He'd been lonely and didn't even realize how lonely until someone exploited it. He'd lost his only real friend because he couldn't handle the truth. Now, he had Nathan back. Had a niece who called him Uncle Dan and made him read the same book 17 times in a row. Had a brother he actually talked to. Had a company he still guided but didn't consume him. Had a foundation doing real good in the world. Had friends, plural, people he'd met through the foundation work and various boards. And he had Maeve, who loved him for reasons that had nothing to do with his bank account. "Yeah," he said. "I'm happy." Good. They stood on that dock as stars began appearing, and Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. Complete. Not because he'd won, not because Madison and Crane were in prison, or because his company was thriving, or because he'd reclaimed everything he'd almost lost, but because he'd finally learned what his mother tried to teach him before she died. Don't just build, live. And for the first time in his entire life, Daniel Brooks was truly living. So here's what I want to know from you in the comments. What would you have done differently if you were in Daniel's position? Would you have listened to Nathan's warning the first time? Or would you have made the same mistakes? Drop your thoughts below, because I'm genuinely curious how different people would handle betrayal like this. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own relationships and what really matters, hit that subscribe button. Because there are more stories like this. Stories about people who lost everything and built something even better from the ashes, amongst other stories. The empire wasn't his greatest asset. It was the friend who tried to stop him from losing it all. And in the end, Daniel Brooks, the self-made billionaire who'd forgotten how to live, finally understood that wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the people who show up when everything falls apart. The ones who tell you hard truths, even when it costs them. The ones who open the door when you come back broken and simply say, "Okay, now we fight." That's the real fortune. Everything else is just numbers on a screen. We're building something here, a collection of people who appreciate good stories. Every subscription moves us closer to 1,000 subscribers. Your name on that subscriber list matters. Will you be on it when we hit the goal? Thanks for watching and comment where you are watching from. I will see you in the next video.